let it flow. And sometimes I'll read something like that, and something within me will really resonate like that. Well, that's really true, you know. But it's something that my mind really has a hard struggle with. So, you know, just kind of leaving it up to the universe without my trying to influence it, you know, to make it better or right or heal it or correct it or whatever. You know? But,
well, that's the if you look at traditional things, Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism, there's the highest insight about this stuff is to do nothing at all. I mean, eventually, you know, because in the beginning you're kind of understanding, you're going to these meetings, you're reading about it, you're trying to think, who am I, what's permanent, what's impermanent, how does it all work, and all this kind of stuff. And that takes a certain amount of effort and application and focus, and you're trying to figure it out, and that's okay. And it's important at that point. But, you know, once you get a sense of that, once you get a sense of who you are and what this is pointing to, and, you know, you kind of start to realize that it's your kind of natural state, your true being, and then you start looking from that perspective, and you realize that you're not doing anything to create that or generate that or maintain that's not a result of any application or effort or focus. And at that point, those kinds of activities become more of a hindrance, more of a distraction, because, you know, it's kind of like when they say, let it be unaltered, unmodified, uncorrected. Mm-hmm. All the stuff is just displaying in this awareness, in this presence that is naturally here with no effort, and this is what's being pointed to. So that's when they're coming in with those kinds of statements. Just let it be. In fact, I've got a song I'll maybe do at the beginning. One of the great teachings from a Buddhist, you know, kind of master, and basically what he's saying is do nothing. Absolutely do nothing at all. Just be and relax and let it be. But, you know, that implies a certain amount of familiarity with what's being pointed to. You just walk up to somebody on the street who knows nothing about their true nature and their suffering and seeking and all that stuff. You just say, just relax, don't do anything, there's nothing to get, nothing to do. It's a little bit not, you know.
And then paradoxically, it almost seems like, you know, we think like Christ said, seek and you shall find, and that now it's gotten to the point where we're saying, don't seek. So it's almost like the purpose of seeking is to realize that you're not going to find by seeking. Well, so you finally give up seeking?
Well, I mean, it all depends. So one of the things, too, is every pointer is relative and only useful in a certain context. You know, and it's not like these teachings and pointers are absolute or like bulletproof fixed it for all times. You know, so that let's say you say seek and you shall find, which Christ said, and but let's say that you find, then are you going to seek anymore?
No.
The seeking would actually take you away from the finding. So once you get a sense of what this is about and you see that, understand that, and this is what it is, then the pointer to seek anything is counterproductive. So let's say that you do find whatever it is. Now somebody's going to say, stop, just relax. You can stop the seeking, stop searching, stop grasping, because we may have been at a certain stage, what is it, I need to find it, I think that's appropriate at that level, because we don't know what it is. So, so you get all these things to, look at who you are and things like that. But then it becomes, at that next point there, when you know what's being pointed to, the seeking actually becomes counterproductive and becomes unnecessary and becomes a kind of contraindicated, let's say, for you at that point. So then that's when you hear people saying, just relax, do nothing, let it be, leave it uncorrected. There's nothing to get, there's nothing to know. Now it kind of implies that you have some sense of what this is.
I guess some of these pointers get in the way. There's one pointer that I really love because it's a real how-to pointer. And it's Bob saying, don't take delivery of thoughts. And it just seems to really come in handy when the world looks like it's caving in. To remember that. And I guess if I hone in on it too much, it starts to get me thinking that I'm in control and I'm...
Well, because you're taking delivery of that thought. So again, we don't want to make a religion out of any of these. Any of these pointers could be. I mean, they're like a scalpel or some instrument. They could save your life or they could kill you, depending on how you handle it. All of them. Every single thing that any teacher ever said is just a temporary thing, that would be useful in a certain circumstance, but kind of unhelpful in another circumstance. So there's a certain, that's why it's a little bit tricky even in meetings and stuff. And I see that a lot in the Advaita stuff. There are all these platitudes floating around out there. People say, well, they saw this teacher and they said there's no one there. There's nothing to do. Well, you can't just grab these things out of the ether and then say, that's it, I've got it, now I know, and then you go around spouting all these things. Like, what's the meaning? What's the context? Why were they saying that? What was the question? And so it's to me that's like taking these things out of kind of out of context. So just we just want to make sure that we understand why these things were said, when they were said, what. So if you have a sense of who you are and you have a sense of what this is pointing to, there's nothing you need to seek. What are you going to seek? I mean, the seeking is just going to kind of take you off into all these other directions. So that's why they say, and I'll sing that song and talk about it at the beginning, but there was this Buddhist teacher, Naropa, and he was a scholar, and he was some kind of leader at this Buddhist university, and he studied for many, many years, like incredibly intensely into the Buddhist traditional doctrine. And yet, at some stage, he wasn't satisfied. And he went off and he found this sagely person, and basically he said, I've been meditating, seeking, searching, studying Buddhism, doing all these right things, all the effort, all the application, mindfulness, all these things. But he wasn't fully at peace with things. So the instruction, which is the song, basically tells him, stop meditating, stop analyzing, stop trying to figure it out, don't do anything. And that was the instruction at that point. And it's just like, well, it seems totally counterintuitive. It seems like completely the reverse of everything you've been kind of studying and all that stuff. But you can take these spiritual pointers and teachings, and they're kind of helpful at a certain stage, but then if you kind of turn them into this kind of churning activity thing where you're working on it, trying to get it, trying to pursue it, imagining there's something that you don't have, and all that, and turning it back into duality again, then the very pointers themselves become a problem. And I saw it for myself. I mean, basically, song and the whole spiritual scene became a source of suffering. The search for enlightenment, like I told that story yesterday, the Zen master says, what's the cause of suffering? If somebody asked him, what's the cause of suffering? He says, the very search for enlightenment is the problem. So that's why I'm a big fan of drop the enlightenment, awakening, and all that stuff. It's actually kind of redundant. Now, it implies, again, that we're having some kind of sense, realizing the immediacy and the presence of really what this is. Because I think, the search, when I have the idea that I'm searching for enlightenment, so what's the core concept? That I'm not there and that there's something that I don't have, and something will happen in time that will somehow transform me into something. So my real concept, when I'm searching for enlightenment, is that I'm impoverished, that I'm limited somehow, I'm missing something. I mean, it could be anyway. So, you're going to have to, so that's a concept. I mean, in the light of non-duality, you're the absolute, you're already free. So clearly the I'm an impoverished, limited being is a concept, but also the spiritual person seeking enlightenment is also a concept. So we can't just, so eventually what you do is see both of those as concept, let it both go. So let the the original concepts kind of let them go in terms of seeing who we are, but then this notion that I'm a spiritual seeker meditating and all this stuff, going for enlightenment and all that, that's actually a form of suffering. I mean, ultimately, and that does fall away in the light of non-duality. Like your being, your natural state as it truly is when we really kind of consider what that is is the freedom, is the peace, and clearly is already present and already attained and completely effortless. So that's when they're kind of, see, because it's like that being, your true nature is effortless, is relaxed, is free of the concepts, is not struggling, is not striving. So we're going to have to kind of come in alignment with that. So that's when you could say, relax or let go or stop searching or whatever, all that stuff. But I'm not so sure that you can just go off spouting that to everybody and his brother.
I wouldn't. I have a hard time spending it to myself.
It's a paradox because most people are not seeking. Apparently, I mean, they're searching.
Well, they're already not seeking. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, or people may not realize they're suffering.
Well, that's why people, in certain circles of non-duality, people are saying, well, Buddha didn't know what he was talking about, Ramana didn't know what they were talking about, because they sometimes told people to do something. How could they be so stupid? Didn't they know there's no doer? I mean, that's so superficial. Of course these people knew what was what. In fact, they had a better understanding than most of the Advaita teachers. But they knew how to skillfully kind of adapt. There's a certain stage where get off your butt, look, have a look, see what's real, Otherwise you're just going to go floating along endlessly, without having a clue as to what's going on here. But at a certain stage, if you're like, kind of Naropa, where you've done all that and you've done your homework and you have a basic sense of things, and then you're almost over-medicating on the spirituality, you're over-applying, over, like, many of us have done. If it's 20, 30 years into this thing and you're still searching for enlightenment or something, you've kind of taken a wrong turn somewhere. Because way back when, the non-duality has said, this reality is what you are. So somebody like that, the thing might be to kind of correct that concept. So what does that really mean? It means that, we may have these concepts. So instead of seeing what's present and what we truly are, which is not a concept, we might be giving the reality to a certain concept. Like either I'm a suffering, limited being, or I'm a spiritual seeker, or I need enlightenment. But essentially, I think if you step out of the whole thing and see what's really going on, it's like a kind of a relinquishment of all the concept. So if I have the concept that I'm a limited person, then there's some concept or pointer that's given, so that I don't see myself anymore as a limited person. But if I'm a hardcore, spiritual seeker, and I'm really invested in this identity of being kind of a seeker, which is actually just another concept, then you might say, well, okay, stop that or question that. So what's the net result of this whole thing is that, without grasping any concept at all, without defining yourself as any concept at all, what's present? And so then you can kind of see why all these teachings and verbiage and discussions are completely conceptual, just in and of themselves. Like that's why the written teachings of sage or something like that are not just in and of themselves, are not really the essence of it. It's not really the ultimate truth somehow. So it does make it, I think we can all understand, it's important to understand it, otherwise you're kind of trying to, like, what's the right concept, what's the right thing to do, what should I be doing, and stuff. And that's probably why these kinds of teachings could never really be packaged or delivered as a product or something like that. So some teacher gives a big spiel about something, they record it in a book or something like that, and they kind of put it out there and people kind of buy it. But it's not, it's kind of a little bit tricky as to the value of that, because technically it's just a bunch of concepts. And I think at the end of the day, the only thing that we need to be concerned about or kind of look at is just, who are we, and what if I have a question or doubt about the nature of my being, that's all that really kind of matters. And I may have just, let's say, one little question or something like that. I don't need to have, like, every teaching under the sun. I might just say, well, what about this? And then maybe there's just a kind of a dialogue or something happens, and then you say, oh, okay, that's not an issue, and then okay, that's it,
It's great to get to that point. that simple-minded point.
Yeah, I think so. But
one thing that I recognize, I was telling Laurie this morning after meeting you, is that I've been a kind of a guru follower for 35 years, and I recognize after you said what you said yesterday, or just being around you, your whole just way of presenting yourself, I saw how big a separation I had made in myself, me not being there. And that I carried it both ways.
okay.
Making myself special, making myself unworthy.
Yeah, and then putting these people up on
Right.
these pedestals, or constantly switching them around too. That's I call it the guru hopping,
Yeah.
where you're just kind of going from one to the other to the other to the other, and that's going to get tiring after that. I did that myself for many years, but there's a point in there where you kind of realize, well, what am I doing? Why am I going to all these kind of people? What am I trying to actually get from it? And it might be good vibes or peaceful environment, or that's fine too. But usually there's just a little nugget under there where what's really going on is that we're still searching and seeking, and still hoping that something's going to happen, or that they have something that we don't have. Or that's what I was doing. I mean, for many years I thought these people, they have it, they have something, and I don't have it. Well, you're already into the illusion right there,
Right.
because you've already as I said yesterday, this reality, the reality in your identity as that, you've already contradicted that, and but we don't often catch that at that stage. We kind of think so we ignore that, but because once you realize and you see the basic import that your natural being already is that, I mean, this kind of urge of guru hopping kind of settles down, because it's not like you're going to get your being or anything by going anywhere. You may do that, but that, it's not that there's anything wrong with any of that per se, but I mean that urge, that compulsion to do it out of this sense of inadequacy, or this definition that I'm a seeker or something like that. So just take that out of the whole picture. You're not a seeker. There's nothing wrong with you. They don't have anything that you don't have, and you're perfectly fine. And then see what it looks like, if you then whatever you do, it just kind of comes up to do something. So, but I mean, it does take a lot of the juice out of it, and sometimes people aren't really attracted to that possibility that the seeking would end. Or that the compulsion to go to a satsang or whatever would actually kind of resolve itself, and sometimes that's just because there's kind of an attachment or investment in the identity.
Yeah.
I hope people can recognize by now that being a spiritual seeker or being a satsang seeker or follower is still a personal identity. It's still an ego position. It's still coming from a position of inadequacy. But again, that's, would you say that to just somebody who's never heard about spirituality or never, nothing at all, and you say all spirituality is a concept? Well, it's not really a concept, but I mean, it is a concept, but this is a very specialized discussion at a certain level, because you've been looking at this stuff for years and years. So we, somebody else you might turn to and say, oh, the most important thing you could do would be to go sit in satsang. It's like the most valuable thing you could possibly do with your time would be let's talk to somebody or something who knows this. There's nothing more useful. But then somebody else you're saying it's a complete concept. So that's tricky, But I think the thing that makes it all clear is just staying consistent with the fundamentals, and then all this stuff kind of makes a lot of sense,
Well, noticing the sense of feeling the sense of separation, and noticing the mind making differences between this and that. Seeing that is kind of the end game. Yeah. When, recognizing that is actually what's happening. because that, yeah.
Yeah, once you could see all the moment you see something, you're pretty much free of it, if you can actually see. So for many years, I'm searching for enlightenment, and then Sailor Bob says, well, given the fact that your being is it, what's the use of the searching for enlightenment? And the moment he said that, it was like all over with, because it was like suddenly clear to my own self that this, like, why was I searching for something when there's this kind of pointing and even recognition within myself of the basic point of kind of what I am, but I hadn't really noticed that concept. But the moment that happened many times actually, you have these little blind spots where you're kind of subtly believing something, you don't really realize it. But the moment that it's pointed out, or you kind of see it, and you kind of compare that against your experience, or what does that even kind of make sense? And you go, oh, wait a minute, I don't believe that. So, like another one, just recalling things that, for me, it's this idea that you're going to get something in the future was pointed out to me as a total imaginary concept, because time is a concept and the future is completely imaginary, and there's nothing in that. And so for many, many years, there's always this thing, whatever it is, it's not with me now, therefore it must be in the future. So, but that was a concept, and I didn't see that. And again, so that was pointed out, and then I realized it just completely dropped away there. And I realized whatever I think, whatever we imagine the future that's going to be some attainment that I'm going to get is completely conceptual. And it's not the way that it works, because really what we're talking about is the fact of our very existence or true nature itself. And is that in the future? It's here already. So just in a couple of statements like that, the search for enlightenment, this whole future thing, that kind of dropped away. And a lot of these things that I talked about from this level, like the practicing, the working on it, the getting it, the doing, the striving, the notion that other people have it, all these things, I think if you just look at them in the clear light of just kind of common sense, and in the light of the principles of the non-dual message, all of those fall very quickly. Because nobody, you don't have to attain your being, you're not practicing to be, you're not struggling to be, other people out there don't have it. The moment you realize that, what this is pointing to, it's like there is nobody out there who has it. So the guru hopping thing just falls. Because we had that subtle assumption that somehow, maybe somebody, and then you get into these funny things like, these concepts really that people think like that. There might be a being sitting out there who kind of has it, and then you imagine all these invisible rays of transmission kind of hitting you and stuff, and you want to go. So they do these funny things in these meetings, and literally in these top songs, they're like jockeying for position to get into the front row.
Been there, done that.
They say, well, because the transmission is stronger. I'm going to get more. I don't know, but it is clear. And again, ultimately it's kind of conceptual. Although at that position where you're imagining all these separations and things, it may, have some kind of meaning at that stage. But so all of these things, and other things that can kind of get pointed out, and so much of what I saw eventually was I didn't see these concepts, and I didn't even know that I had them. They were like so kind of like so much a part of my mental framework that I literally never stopped to pause to notice how conceptual all these things were, and in many ways the spirituality itself was also kind of almost reinforcing sometimes the concepts, or people that I would meet, or spiritual people, or teachers, or friends along the way that I actually kind of came to see sometimes were actually reinforcing and emphasizing these concepts. I went to many teachers who said, you got to get enlightened, you got to get enlightened, you got to get it, someday you'll get it. And now I see that it was actually I already had the concept that I didn't have it, and these are authority figures who are kind of telling me, oh, it's so important that you kind of get it. So eventually, to kind of start to question those things or have it kind of pointed out, because I think if we actually hear these things or get we see them pointed out as concepts, and we look at the basics. It's not; these things are not difficult. They're not particularly hard to see any of this stuff. But usually we've drifted away from the basic non-dual message. Like there's very little non-duality out there today in the United States, very little. And when I talk about non-duality, I'm talking about, this reality is you are that. No compromise on that. And, no tricky, someday and go deeper and lose your conditioning and blah, 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 and go all these steps and stages and all that stuff. I don't know, maybe I'm not really looking that carefully, but I don't feel or tend to see that clear, direct, simple message is all that particularly common. So that's important, though, to hear that, and that's why I kind of stress a lot of that over and over again. It's so easy to say, well, there's reality, okay, we are that, okay, and then put that on the back shelf and kind of move on. But to me, there's really no moving on beyond that. If your being is that unconditioned reality itself, and it has all these characteristics that people talk about, like where are you supposed to go? Where are you supposed to move on from that? So I think I guess part one of this is and I think it's the most important part of this whole thing is what is the basic positive kind of core message, which is who you are. What is the purpose of spirituality, and what is the nature of that reality, and what is your relationship to that? Basically, boiling down to that's what you are. That you are that. And then is that clear? Do we understand what's being pointed to? So I think we all should know by now, in all the spirituality that we've done, that all these traditions have told all of us over and over and over again that our innate natural being as it is the absolute spiritual reality. So that's very important, I think, to hear that. And then to understand what that means. Well, what is we're sitting here. Here I am sitting here. What does that actually mean? What am I? Is it this body? Is it this mind? What is unconditioned? What is this nature? So we need just a little bit of pointing to that, because there's not really too much here. There's a body, mind appearing, changing, passing away, and then there's not too much to work with. But there is this other kind of interesting thing too going on that of our very existence itself, and this consciousness in which it's all happening. And I think we get some kind of a feel, or at least a pointer to that's kind of what we're looking at. We're not looking at just this transitory body and mind that come and go. That's not unconditioned, unchanging, permanent and all that stuff. So if you could factor that out and say, well, what else is left here? It gets very, very simple and almost inescapable, because there's almost nothing left except just the sheer fact of being itself, just being present. And that's what we were talking about yesterday. But this being, and if we didn't know or weren't sure what they were talking about, I would say, at least my recommendation is just to be very, very clear that is all they're talking about. That's what it's about. The fact of your being, your actual presence itself, is what all the spirituality is actually pointing to. And it's not like that's something you have to get to, but it's just something that we probably didn't really consider. And so you look straight to that and see what it is. That's what you are. You're not just some ephemeral appearance coming and going in the mind. It has no substance. It's just a complete appearance. But if you're going to be anything at all, if your essential being is going to be something, it's going to be something that remains with you, that's constant, that doesn't change, that you can't lose the essence. So what is it, that remains with you that you never lose? And in my book, if there is anything like that at all, it's just your sheer being itself. And that's not just some inert presence, or we can see it all right now. Not only is our being present and undeniable, but it's vividly aware and conscious. That's why they're always talking about it as consciousness. being and consciousness. So everybody can see clearly right now this kind of inescapable fact of their presence, which is kind of vividly aware and conscious, effortlessly here. And that's not a thing. See, so then it gets into this, we're discussing, suddenly we're noticing and seeing, and maybe sometimes for the first time if we haven't looked this way, oh, that's what we're talking about. And then we can look straight to that and basically see all kinds of things. Everybody can see it right now, but not. It's when we're not dealing with theory. We're just looking at our direct experience. Our very presence is not a thing. Because when I say, "Do you know that you are?" and can you recognize this present aware consciousness, you're not recognizing a thing, a tangible object, some form, something like this guitar or something, like there it is. Although it's very clear and very certain, I mean, you have no doubt about your presence, but it's curious to also note that even though it's very clear and present and all that, you know exactly what it is, but it's not something that you see with your senses. It's not something that you grasp with your mind. So, that's why they talk about formless and empty and stuff like that. I mean, a great thing from the Buddhist tradition, they have that term, it's space-like awareness. Space-like means like this room, space is very intangible, even the physical space. And this awareness or being or whatever is kind of intangible like that. And yet it's aware. So all these terms, they start to make sense. Being, well, that's pretty clear. I am. I know that I am. Conscious, okay, yeah, conscious. Kind of, formless or space-like, something present but kind of intangible. Okay, well, yeah. And if that's what I call the seeing or the looking or knowing for yourself, getting familiar, getting friendly with the fact of your own presence to actually acknowledge it and see what it is. And it's not something you're outside of. You can't say there's you and then somehow, there's that being awareness over there. That's interesting. How do I get to it? I mean, that's not how it looks in our experience. So we're not actually separate beings standing outside of this. And you just go on and on. You look at all these things and suddenly you realize, kind of what they're describing. So all of these terms, being, awareness, formless, space-like, I am that, unchanging, the space of phenomena, the space in which everything occurs, whatever, all this stuff. This is just a description, I think, or of what's already present.
Well, the way you describe it, John, so, as you say, it's the fundamentals are so simple, and yet so many words are written about this, and even in your own case, several books, they kind of slice it in different ways, it seems.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. There's kind of a drawback with that, because it makes it, it makes it seem more conceptual or more complicated. But, you have to realize that in those books and those dialogues, those were many, many different people wanting to say, well, what is this? And then with their particular kind of question, you have to read every book or every dialogue or every pointer. All you have to do is stop, and notice for yourself who you are, what your nature actually is, and just see that. And then all these books and pointers, you kind of get a sense of kind of where they're coming from. But I mean, if you take a book like Ramana's Talks, 600 pages. It's not like that was one person. He went through 600 pages just over and over and over, just that one person. It was many hundreds of people over years. And it's and he may have just said one or two things to somebody, and then it's okay. And they just left the ashram and never to be seen again, and happy campers. So, but we think that we've got to read somehow all hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these dialogues, and somehow that's what this is. That has nothing to do with what this is. In fact, that becomes that counterproductive thing, where it actually becomes a distortion and becomes more complicated. It's better to. Ramana said something that he says. he used to write these small books, like he had one called 40 Verses on Reality. These little pamphlets, they cost like 5 cents, little cheap books. He said most people don't relish the small books because they don't have the maturity or kind of to realize the value of those. They're more attracted to these big, complicated things. It takes a certain amount of kind of resonance with this to basically pick up a little pamphlet of 5 or 10 pages and realize, it kind of has all the pointers already in that. But anyway, the point of all this is that, that your being is present and that your true nature is already attained, and all these qualities are here for any of us to look at and notice that it's already the way it is. So the whole thing can be summarized in one of these statements that we hear, but that you already are what you're seeking. You're already that. It's already present. It's already attained. And I think it is important just to put that out there, like it was put out to me. Didn't you know that, or do you know that? Do you realize that? We've been searching, but did we realize this basic fundamental point that all this stuff is already present and it's attained, and you are that. Now that's where that kind of other thing comes in about relax and stop. Full stop with that. So everybody in this room is present and aware and is what they are. Just think of it. You are what you are, and what you are is what they're talking about, and that that's basically kind of it. And to start to appreciate that, and to recognize the meaning of that, and to see and to really be acknowledge or recognize even what that kind of means. And so that came to me by somebody just basically saying it very clearly and say, look at this, don't you know? Now, I had been in that tradition and studied Advaita, and I had a lot of faith in some of these teachers, and intuitively I felt that they knew what they were talking about. So when somebody that had gotten exposed to that and said it out of their direct experience, it kind of made me stop and say, well, wait a minute, it kind of made me kind of be willing to appreciate that, or at least say, well, what are they talking about? What does it mean, what are they really trying to say here? So that, to me, that's the most important message. That's like the important takeaway of this whole thing, however you want to say that. But you are that, and then the only other thing, I didn't get too much into it yesterday, but maybe touched on it. But where does the seeking and suffering come from, and how does that work? Well, it basically comes from not seeing this. So if I don't see clearly and understand what I truly am, and my mind creates this alternative of something else other than that, and I begin to live my life as if that's my identity, and that's all a concept, because we're not doing that unless we're thinking about it or conceptualizing. We don't do it when we're asleep or going out to the movies, watching a movie, and just enjoying, our life. We're not really thinking I'm a separate person apart from reality. It doesn't even enter in. But the mind, until it's very clear who we are, the mind creates this alternate identity. That's the separate ego idea, or the separate self. It's not a reality. It's nothing to overcome. It's not a monster. It doesn't even exist. So all this ego death and overcoming the dark night of the soul is another concept. Because if the ego was real, and if there was such a separation and it was very powerful and you could find it, you could go, take a sword and go fight it and battle it and all this stuff, and then say that you overcame it and you're working on it. But it's not really like that. This ego idea is a fiction that never was present. The assumption that I stood apart as a separate being, well, it was never true. So, but that concept, though, even though it's imaginary and it's just conceptual, it does become the basis of every other suffering concept. And because everything that makes us suffer in life, whether it's seeking or suffering or feeling bad about ourselves or feeling I'm a doer or I'm not a doer or I'm spiritual or I'm not spiritual, these are all definitions of the I. But not the definitions of the being. So in truth, all these concepts have nothing to do with us. I mean, fundamentally. So I think it's important. It was important for me, and might be useful, but to see how all the suffering and concepts, they're purely conceptual, they're purely imaginary, they're completely mental constructs generated in thought. You know, they only exist only when you're thinking about it. When you're not thinking about it, when your mind is peaceful, when you're not conceptualizing, you don't have any suffering. You're not a seeker. You don't have any questions. You don't even have any questions unless you start thinking. You know, like somebody said, I think yesterday we were talking about, but what happens in deep sleep and all that? Well, without the concept or the thought or the question, that you don't even have that question. I mean, your being isn't sitting here saying, well, what happens to me in deep sleep? So,
John, you can't have the suffering arise just from your situation as opposed to thinking about some imaginary future situation.
well, it can arise in the immediate situation, but only if you're conceptualizing about it. So, okay, what if I'm sitting here and saying, well, gee, maybe somebody doesn't like me or something like that, or maybe I don't like it at this room, I don't like it, or I do like it, or whatever. I mean, I still have to, I still have to kind of get into that, but without those concepts.
Would that be true, like with the loss of a child? It would be strictly the concepts that would make you suffer there?
Well, it depends. Again, that's kind of interesting. This is not a contradiction to human feeling. Let's say something happens like that, and you feel just at a human level like a sense of loss, or you lose it. That's not necessarily even suffering. Let's say that you're my friend of many years, and we have a rapport, and we enjoy each other's company, and then something happens. I mean, there's a recognition there. I might miss you, or I might say, well, how much that meant for me, or I may think of you longingly of how much it meant to me.
So there could be
But that's not
feeling,
yeah.
yet you wouldn't obsess about it in your head with a lot of thoughts of what's it going to be like without it, but you'd feel a deep sadness or something like that.
Yeah, and you can feel emotion and a certain kind of but it's a different kind of a thing, because what I'm talking about in terms of suffering is just like I'm diminished somehow fundamentally, or I'm missing something, or I can't be happy, or there's something wrong with me, or why did this happen, all this other kind of thing. In other words, but that kind of thing starts to relate to that sense of the limited me idea. But just to feel a genuine emotion of compassion or appreciation, or recognizing the suffering in the world, or seeing tragedy and feeling an emotion, to me that's actually not even suffering really. It's more like a compassion, or just a pure feeling. So you can have feeling, you can have anger, you can have a tear, you can have laughter, you can have enjoyment, all these things. You can have anxiety. So you're walking along in a dark street with, whatever thugs out there about to pounce on you or something. It's like, it's not like you're going to say la 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 la, So you may have a natural kind of awareness of what's going on, but this whole but never in that stuff. I go through all that stuff all the time, but never in all that stuff is the thought that there's something wrong with me, that there's something wrong with what's happening. So let's say that you pass away, and I have a feeling, and something comes up. See, because at some other level, from this other thing we talked about yesterday, about it's not coming from that separate doer anyway. It's just an arising. But the feeling of that, as I see it, would be, so in none of that is there ever a sense that something is wrong with you, or something is incomplete or shouldn't be happening, or that the situation that you would judge or label the situation somehow as it shouldn't be that way or something like that. And take it all the way back into this body, mind, and the tears, or the memory, or whatever. It's like, why would I say, what is it? Does that make me incomplete, or does that make me limited, or does that, because even if let's say tears came, and then I thought, well, that shouldn't be happening, or So you don't even have to put any label on it. That's a little bit interesting I'm glad you brought that up, because it is a little bit of a subtlety on that. This is not saying that you don't feel anything, but it's more like it's the place in which it's interpreted in relation to your core identity.
And you don't obsess with your head with a million thoughts going out.
No, I've found no, because that conceptualizing, once it gets past the immediacy of the experience, and it kind of goes off on a tangent of all this conceptualizing, that gets largely driven by more of that imaginary content.
Yeah.
So something comes up, you feel a strong emotion, you feel a strong reaction, good or bad, whatever, just something is coming up. It tends to be just kind of in the immediacy of the presence of that, and then like everything else, it blows through and settles down.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself where? You find yourself, just kind of present and aware as what you are, with no concept. And you don't have to say, well, that shouldn't have happened, or what am I going to do about it, or gee, that wasn't high enough, or something, or if I was spiritual, I wouldn't have done that, or gee, I've got to start, kind of working on myself, all this kind of stuff. So just to even let the emotions and the body, mind, and all this stuff just simply come up spontaneously and do their thing, and then, but as they subside naturally, as everything does, that the conceptualizing around the self-center doesn't somehow keep tagging along, and
That's really clear. Yeah. Thank you.
So even there was a thing with Maharaj. He had this throat cancer, and he said something one time. I remember he says, if the body whimpers or sheds a tear or cries out in pain, he said, just what it's doing, Like wasn't taking that ownership, like wasn't saying, this is me, or something. So
what do you think about like Byron Katie might take that kind of situation with loss of a child and say, tell yourself, I'm willing to suffer that pain, or I look forward to that loss, or something like that. Does that seem more?
Yeah, that's at a different level. It's not a bad thing. That's at a different level. That's still putting you in the game as this kind of entity with this little program. Because people say, well, the thing to do is I should accept everything. Well, it's a little problematic, because you got the I back in the game. You got this kind of strategy going on, and you've got this subtle thing, I think, hanging out, that there's this kind of, if I do that, I might get to something. It's one of those pointers. It's actually not a bad pointer at a certain stage. Let's say somebody's resisting and fighting and struggling and complaining and flailing at life and all that stuff, and you just say, hey, wait a minute, develop some approach of kind of acceptance, of seeing, that does move you toward this place, kind of where you finally realize that it's just happening, and you don't even have a position of it. We don't want to end up basically saying, I'm a person and my spiritual position is I just go around accepting everything. Because it's artificial, it's actually kind of, you don't even really need that. It's simpler to just to say, or just see what's going on, is that it's just happening. And also, that what you are at the fundamental level is fine. You haven't altered or lost, who you are. And then you don't. It's the same type of feeling, but you don't have any strategy, any little filter interposed in there, like still a little maintenance program. So that the natural state, so to speak, are just kind of being. Doesn't have to have any. It's pretty extraordinary, actually. It doesn't have to have any remaining spiritual little thing to be doing. Like you were saying yesterday, that I am that pointer. The being that we are doesn't have to go around thinking I am that. So it is, when you look deeply into, kind of what we're talking about, and you see kind of what you are, you don't have to have any more spirituality. You don't have to have any more pointer or any more I'm going to accept, or it's not even, people say, well, everything is God's will or something, but even that's just a kind of a concept. Some people would say it's all chance. Some would say it's God's will. Some would say it's karma. But all these are just kind of, ways of trying to describe. What you don't even, I found you don't even have to have any of that stuff. It's just what is. And you're what you are. and there's nothing that you need to do or kind of strategize about or have a position. You don't even have to say, I am the witness, or I am the awareness, or I am the absolute. Even that would be too much work, really.
But you did say, if there's one thing you can take away from this weekend, it is that concept, I am that. Which is right away I say, that doesn't resonate.
But that doesn't apply to you anymore, because you're beyond that.
Yeah.
So you've graduated from all that.
feel
Why are you
guilty
here?
when I
Why are
say
you
that.
here? Well, but don't be willing to, when you go to the dentist, you get your tooth repaired and you leave. So you don't just sit around his office saying, why am I here? Somebody just put the syringe in me again. It's like, this is painful. Why are they doing this to me? Well, because you're hanging around the office and you shouldn't be there anymore. They're drilling my teeth. They're filling my teeth. Why are they doing this? I don't have any cavities. So the I am that, and all these pointers, everything I've said today, everything was just a pointer to see who you are and be who you are. Which you are already, so it's even redundant. Even the pointers are useless, What do I have to tell you to be who you are? I mean, you are whatever you are. But if there was any doubt about that, or if we were giving precedence to a concept at a certain stage, then maybe that would be useful. But to see what's being pointed to see what you are, and to know that I am that. I think your problem is you probably like I was too, but you kind of keep going back to the pointer when you don't need it anymore.
I think I really have embedded in me this trying too hard from childhood. Just got to keep trying hard.
Yeah.
And I overcomplicate things.
Yeah. Well, so let me. That reminds me. Maybe this song. So this one's for you. So this was the exact song that I was talking about, which is exactly the topic. And just I'll do this. Let's see. So Naropa was the Buddhist scholar, and he had mastered the Buddhist stuff, and he kept working. And even after he knew more, that he was completely completely mastered it, and was completely proficient, and he just was still going. So this is in I think it's Kagyu Tibetan Buddhism, but it's probably their most famous teaching. This little statement that they make. That Tilopa was this Buddhist sage, and he said, so Naropa said, I've done this, I've done that, what do I really need to understand? And he said, this is what you need. So he pointed out this, it was called Words of Advice from Tilopa to Naropa. And let me talk about it, what it might mean, but... Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go. Let go. What is happening right now? Let go, let go of what is happening right now. Don't try to work it out. Don't do a thing at all. Just rest, just rest. free and easy right now. Just rest, just rest, free and easy right now. Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go. Let go of what is happening right now. Let go, let go of what is happening right now. Let it be, just let it be, free and easy right now. Free and easy right now. Free and easy right now. It really struck me when I heard about that. It's a different kind of Buddhism. Not the typical kind that I grew up with, Eightfold Path, meditate, hard.
Well,
But
speaking
this-
about working hard, that Naropa goes to Naropa, Marpa, Naropa, and this Naropa, he had an incredible life where his master had him build a house 24 times, just kept tearing it down, building it, tearing it down.
Well, it's an interesting story about that. I just have to read something of it. But he had, he did all these evil deeds in his life. So he had all this, as they say, kind of bad karma and heavy-duty kind of concepts. So what I read recently that was interesting, though, is in his travels before he met Marpa, he went to a Dzogchen master, which is a lot like this stuff. And the guy gave it to him like the simple, straight-out, you are that, and he couldn't receive it. Like he couldn't take it in. He had too many. He felt so bad and had so many concepts and identities that when the guy said, "Look, you're already kind of free. There's nothing to kind of get or whatever," he just like sailed right past that. So he went to Marpa, and there was an interesting thing that they said is that Marpa was very skillful. He realized he had to do something kind of tricky with him. So he came up with all these, do this, do that, work on it, build a tower, move it, and it made Naropa feel like he was really doing something.
Then he had to destroy it and do it again.
Yeah, but the whole thing. The funny thing is, at the end of the whole thing, basically, it made Naropa feel like he had burned off his karma.
Where he could have just taken the advice.
And then what happened at the end? The same stuff. Because if you read that stuff, he suddenly realized, okay. So that's why and they did say in this book, it was interesting that was kind of Marpa's skill as that teacher at that level, because he knew that if he just told Milarepa the simple truth, like that other teacher had already done, it really wouldn't have struck home, because he was so into this idea that he's an evil being with this karma, that he's unworthy. So even when somebody was telling him that you're free and all that stuff, he said, well, I'm too unworthy to understand that. But if I go build all these towers and work on it and do all these things, then I'll be worthy. But it's a kind of interesting thing. It's all his perception, I think, anyway. Who knows? But I wasn't there, so it's just something I read.
I wanted to ask you, I sometimes meditate on this pointer that I came across. It said the spiritual secret is you have to become what you already are, which sounds similar to what Sailor Bob told you, does it?
Yeah, definitely.
And sounds very similar. Unfortunately, I didn't have the same experience you had.
Well, but I read those same exact things 30 years ago. I mean, I read on day one in 1984. I picked up I am that. It says on page 1, you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're the pure awareness, you are that.
But as I sometimes meditate on that, it kind of brings to mind that.
So it's just but I didn't also stop and really, I had certain ideas about who I was and what this is all about that I just didn't stop long enough to really kind of linger on that and really appreciate what he had said, so. But it was there all along, and I'm sure everyone here, I mean, we've all heard, these things, you are the self, we've read Ramana, we've read I am that, we've done all this stuff, and but it's a difference between just like reading about it, saying, okay, you should become the self. Well, technically that's got a little problem in it anyway, because you are the self. But that's a good pointer, though, for somebody. Well, you should become what you already are.
Yeah.
Now, if you have to stop and think about that, you can't actually become what you are.
You're right.
But it would be a good pointer, because if you looked at that pointer and then you thought, wait a minute, I should, and then you pondered on that and you thought, well, wait a minute, I actually am whatever I am already. And it was really kind of a clear seeing it. Then whether even that pointer, even though it was a half step or kind of technically slightly conceptual, it's still, you still got the point of it. So it's not just a matter of sitting around reading I am that. I've actually been in the past in groups and with friends and stuff, literally sitting around reading out of that book for I am that, 20 years ago. It's kind of funny when I think about it now. We're all sitting around in a room, you're pure awareness, you are that, you're the unconditioned, you're not the body, you're not the mind. And we're going, yeah, it's amazing, just reading it. And then you're like years later, yeah, but what am I? When am I going to get it? And all these funny kind of concepts. And that's where I was for many, many years. It's like, it's kind of like, I am that. Theoretically, I can see that I am that, but and then my mind would kind of step in and like all my friends, but when are we going to realize it? Like, when are we going to get it? When's it going to happen for me? And the mind subtly puts it back into a concept, as if it was an experience in time, as if it was an attainment, as if there were people out there like Maharaj that actually had it, somehow that you didn't, or Ramana had it, or somebody like that. But each and every one of those interpretations is conceptual, and we're putting that back on something that they never said. They never said that in that book. I mean, if you really look at what they're kind of saying. So you can take a non-dual type of pointer like that and kind of read it, and even resonate with it, and stuff like that, study it and all that stuff. And then, if you're not seeing what's going on, you just, without noticing it, you put back onto it all of the dualistic concepts again. And then you say, and the funny thing is you believe them. You assume, and there's what those concepts, those are actually self-centered, me-centered definitions. I'm a being who's not there, somebody had it, there's something that has to happen to me, and we don't really catch the idea that all of those concepts are imaginary, they're all in thought, they're all based on the separate me idea, and we're just like going for the hook in complete faith and belief that that's exactly the way that it is. And all that's happening is your mind is telling you you're a limited being with something wrong with you, and you're saying, sign me up. And we pay good money to go out and hear people tell us that we're no good. Go to some retreat where they work on it, you're not there yet. We pay these people money, hard-earned money. We spend our year's vacation for people to put us back into the trap. It's like, but we don't see that because we're still believing in that concept. We're still having that conceptual idea. And even the non-duality pointers, the great powerful teachings and stuff, it's hard. You're fighting against kind of like this whole belief system. And so But eventually, we start to question that, or somebody points it out. It just, because the problem with that whole thing is it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel clear. It doesn't feel at peace. There's something doesn't feel acceptable. It's dissatisfying somehow. And we can be a good soldier and do the spiritual thing and go year after year after year. But whatever. If we're not getting to the essence of this, even there's a point. Even we will realize that we can't take it anymore. And we'll start to say, well, wait a minute, and we'll start re-examining. But so eventually we're just going to come back and examine and look at the fundamental point, that we actually probably heard, many, many years ago about what is the nature of my identity. My identity, our real identity. And then we'll go back and we'll realize, I think what we heard on day one probably, or maybe we didn't, or most of us at least had stumbled in some book somewhere, or some pointer that basically was saying that you're already free and stuff. That you are the self and you are that, and you've never been separate from that. And so it's funny, when I read I Am That in 1984, every single page on that book is kind of proclaiming this non-duality and the ultimate freedom of your natural state. There's no doubt about it. But it puzzles me now, however, I can kind of understand it somewhat, how I could, and I had that book and other books at that level, kind of with me, at my side, at my bedside, on my lampstand, for years, almost 20 years. But when I saw Sailor Bob, he just kind of broke the shell open by just saying, well, yeah, but don't you understand what you're reading about? Haven't you ever really considered what they're actually saying? Do you really? Yeah, he kind of said, yeah, you've been doing all this advice stuff for all these years. He's kind of implying, that's really not that interesting. That's not what it really is. Do you really actually know what they're talking about? Do you really realize, kind of what they're trying to say? And somehow it was like a kind of a wake-up call to basically stop, reevaluate the whole situation, and just go back to the fundamentals and say, well, wait a minute, what is this about, going to satsang for 20 years and kind of floating along is okay, but it's not really the same as what these people are talking about. They were saying, know who you are, see what's real, get to the bottom of this thing, who are you, kind of thing. And so that kind of kicks in, and then you kind of look freshly at that. And that's what I'm kind of trying to encourage here. Yeah.
I have a question regarding suffering.
Yeah.
He was talking about the loss of a child. I'm talking about, do you see a lot of things sometimes that they children and whatever. It causes you this intense emotions without wanting to give them a concept.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess in this culture I'm used to that I need to believe that these things are wrong in order for me to to have the energy or the focus to say, I really want to change this, I want this to be different. And what I'm learning little by little is that, I can still be in action without having to make the reality wrong. Without having to say, this is wrong, this can be different, which is it's subtle, but it really made a huge difference for me.
Yeah.
So what is your
we don't see, we're not, in looking at what we are, we're not going to lose any normal intelligence or discrimination or seeing some suffering or unnecessary thing or violence. And very clear as before, maybe even clearer than we were.
Mm-hmm.
If you see ignorance and suffering and all that stuff, it's not like you don't see that, or you don't understand that it's unnecessary or that it could change or something like that. So you see all that stuff. And maybe something will come up to do something, Maybe that will arise to do something. But I guess what I'm saying is that, you started saying sometimes intense emotion comes up. Well, that's okay. Because there's nothing right or wrong about that. It doesn't imply that you're a no-good person. It's just an intense emotion coming up. So if there's no labeling on that, and they will come up, because the sages and other people that, they have intense emotions, strong feelings. There's no, if we don't think so, we're kind of deluding ourselves. So intense emotions come up, end of story. It's just like a non-issue. unless it's saying, because this is coming up, this means that I'm no good, and there's something, all that whole conceptual stuff. So that part falls away, and you're left with a body, mind functioning, and sometimes that's intense emotions. And then seeing in the world, all kinds of things, sometimes unnecessary suffering and ignorance and violence and stuff like that, and also a recognition and some intelligence, recognizing that, in many cases that's not necessary, or could be changed, or could be altered or helped. That's a compassion. And then maybe something comes up and you do something, It's like, and that's all. So in all that whole display of everything, there's nothing right or wrong about you, or something shouldn't have happened. It's just so it just pulls the person and the judgment out of it. The kind of the self-centered judgment of somehow you're standing in the middle of this whole affair as this kind of entity that is somehow, necessary, or or the really strong sense of the personal, like me. So, but that can be pulled out of the picture, and it goes on just as well. And I feel actually it goes on more intelligently and a little bit smoother without that. So if you're a suffering being and got all these kind of projections about everything and stuff, and then you're actually trying to help somebody else, they're going to get a big taste of you, of all your beliefs. Like, let's say, like we see this all the time with, like, kind of spiritual people, or Christian kind of missionaries. They have such they kind of go out and try to help everybody, but they've got all their own perspectives of what's right and what's wrong. So not only are they trying to help people, but they're also inadvertently communicating all their own kind of concepts too. So I would say if you're going to help somebody at a practical level, seems more common sense to not have that seeking, suffering, and doubt, as part of your experience that's being brought into the situation. So why not just do the helping and the spontaneous action without that sense of separation? So it's okay. But and we do see the suffering, and we do see the children that are starving, and the wars and the evils so-called in the world and all that. But the only thing though that I see, and I don't know how you see it, but the basic bottom line thing is that so much of that suffering and violence is caused by ignorance. People that don't know who they are, people that are in fear, people that are in that ego idea, people that are in gross, very dense kind of conceptual ignorance. And, out of that comes all this stuff of fighting and stealing and murdering and harming other beings and all that, out of just nothing but a kind of a fundamental ignorance. And so, but then the reaction to that isn't so much like, well, why did God create this, and oh, it's so bad, but just almost like a compassion to say, just to see like the cause of, to see all this unnecessary suffering that people are inflict on themselves, that if they would actually stop to see what's what, that they wouldn't have that, And,
yeah, I don't know, that's what I'm thinking, but what I have noticed is that when I see violence, I become very violent against the perpetrator. And that's kind of almost like it touched me too. I become... in my mind, I may not do the actions, but in my mind I can see all this, in a second I can figure out, 10 ways to get rid of this person or get rid of this. And it's, I'm not any better than the person who's doing the harm. I'm just not in action. And I don't know exactly what to do with that, because it is there. It shows up all the time. My actions may be different, but it shows up all the time.
Yeah, well, but, there's, to me that becomes our own thing, It's like our own internal reactions and responses to those. It's not his issue, Person's violent, ignorant, suffering out there, that's one thing, and then there's, my own reaction to that, or the conceptual reaction, or the way the mind frames all that. And that's going to get, to me, that gets more ultimately down to, who we are, who we take ourselves to be. I'm not sure that, again, this is very relatively kind of speaking, but my main thing is, what I've found is that just make sure that the truth of who you are and what your identity is, just at least make sure that part is very clear. And I have found that a lot of those concepts, see, to me, a lot of what I call the suffering concepts that are based on separation and fear and retaliation and judgments and opinions and self-preservation of the me and all that stuff. There's a lot of that stuff, and so much of that kind of reaction is in that. It's kind of created in that kind of thing. So a lot of that just kind of takes care of itself, I've found. Like when we see that we're not a limited being, isolated in the world, something wrong with us, that we need to defend it or preserve it or something, find the answer to what's real or something. But it leaves a body-mind functioning basically in life kind of naturally without that strong reference of being a defective self. And that's what I found. And it's and then things do come up, things come up. But it tends to be less self-centered and less conceptual and less fear-based and less separation-based, less of me and you kind of thing. It doesn't mean that there would never be a violent reaction or an anger or something like that. That's another thing that, like I was saying before, if we thought that people that knew who they are were never angry or never violent, that's completely mistaken. Absolutely mistaken, there's no doubt about it. Jesus in the temple, Ramana had his fits, Buddha got upset about things. But we have to kind of feel our way into kind of where they're kind of experiencing it from. In that, do they kind of somehow become defective or separate from who they are? So that was actually a big lesson for me, because I had a lot of concepts about spiritual people. Like, if you were spiritual, you would look this way. And I with all my command, all my insight after all these years, I absolutely feel that that's completely false. That is an immature kind of erroneous concept about the nature of reality, really. Say, well, and we even put these people on pedestals like the Ramanas or whatever, and people literally start editing out of their biography the parts they don't want us to know, literally. So I've actually seen some manuscripts and talked to some people. People would actually not let certain incidents be published out of Ramana's life because they felt if people heard about that it would compromise his spiritual image. But it was factual things, and so that, to me, that's kind of interesting. So who's doing that? Ramana's not editing his life and saying, but the people, the followers, have this image that they feel is, he's a spiritual being. Like they had this thing with Maharaj. He used to smoke all the time, cigarettes and stuff. So they did this film. It was kind of a biography thing. They're kind of filming him. It was one of these things you can buy. But anyway, and literally in his satsangs, he's talking about Advaita and you are that. The whole time he's just puffing away constantly. one after another, after another, after another, after another. All day long, for years at a time. And that's the way that he was. And he didn't care, didn't change the true nature or anything like that. But these film people, when they were doing this, they said, well, we can't actually show that because, it doesn't look spiritual. So they literally, in this one program, they literally edited out and cut out every time that he was smoking a cigarette. They actually physically cut it out so it would only show him when he wasn't putting a cigarette to his mouth. Now, where was that coming from? That wasn't coming from him. That was coming from these people who had this spiritual concept that a spiritual person shouldn't smoke a cigarette or shouldn't be angry or something like that. But but you can see that something is not quite right with that.
Sometimes you're not even aware of it. 2 weeks ago I went to a training. We had a break, and the speaker, who I liked until that point, she was outside smoking, and then I found myself, I didn't want to go back to her training. And I was like, what is this about?
Because she was smoking?
Yeah, she was smoking, but I didn't even know that I was.
So what's wrong with smoking?
Absolutely.
But it's funny though, yeah.
I didn't even realize. I'm walking back, and I have this resistance. I'm thinking, what the heck is going on here? And what I realized is I was totally turned off by the fact that I was smoking, and then I didn't even realize I was that prejudiced about people smoking. I didn't smoke for 20 years.
Yeah.
So that was really fun. So it was just, I was totally unconscious about my own prejudice. And I can't even imagine how many more I have.
Well, it's okay, but again, basically, you are what you are, and your true nature is what it is. That's the main thing, and then all this stuff takes care of itself. Now, are these people, are these types? When we look and see who we are, we see the basic truth of all this stuff. Are we really out there necessarily, just for no reason, killing and maiming and? It doesn't make any sense. It's not really that intelligent, but we can't put a blueprint on it either and say, it will look like this. That doesn't make sense because, it's like Krishna told Arjuna, go fight and kill your brother, your uncle, your grandfather. Go kill them. The Lord, God, Krishna, he said. So Arjuna didn't, It's a funny. That's why the pointer is that they can't. They're not bulletproof because they went out to the battlefield. Arjuna is basically saying, "Look, I'm a spiritual being. I don't want to hurt anybody. I can't fight." And Krishna said he said that's a concept. You're a warrior. You have your duty. Blah 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 blah. And I can't remember the whole story, but basically he said, "No, pick up the bow and go fight." So we can have these kind of spiritual purity concepts, I don't harm, I don't do this, I don't fight, I don't smoke. It's a complete concept. It's a total self-identity. It's saying like I'm this person who has all these attributes and it's kind of somehow pure, right? And because I have that is the spirituality. So that's the only hidden catch in that is that if you don't want to smoke, don't smoke. If you don't want to kill, don't kill. Whatever. But if inside of the way you look at yourself, you're saying, this, I have this identity and it makes me something, as a spiritual person, somehow special, or somehow I'm a spiritual person, that's still a conceptual position. Because that's not what you are. You're the pure being, the pure awareness that isn't any concept. So it's just another way of talking about don't hold on to spiritual concepts. You're not a seeker, ultimately. You're not a student of anybody, You're not a person on the path to enlightenment. All that stuff, that's all some kind of makeshift concept. So let's go back to what these people said, You are the supreme reality itself. Not that body, not that little puny mind, not some little flicker in the appearance that just lasts for a second and never to return again. See, because in that whole position, the whole focus is on, that's what I am somehow. Instead of seeing, this whole world displays in consciousness and stuff. And that consciousness is what I am and maybe even beyond it. Maybe consciousness itself is just coming and going as an appearance and something beyond that. But so by the time we're talking about bodily actions and what I do and how it works, we'd kind of come, kind of pretty well down into this thing of, that sense of identity may be kind of more associated with that. And so just to reset, go back to the fundamentals. Let's kind of see who you really are and what's really true and what's most important. And then if that body mind does a few things in the appearance, okay. Even if you were so-called, which I don't speak in this language, but just so-called totally liberated or whatever, your body-mind would still do these little good and bad things in the appearance and then peter out eventually. So it's like, kind of what, can't get too over, amplified about that either. So,
John, we're talking about it seems like we're bordering on the paradoxical. And since Byron Katie was brought up, I read it recently again, where she was talking about young children dying or rape or war. She was saying, I don't condone that, but I don't tell myself that's not the way it should be. Because she says anytime you tell yourself something shouldn't be that way and it is that way, you suffer. So there's a little paradox there where she's saying, loving what is never telling yourself things shouldn't be the way they are. And at the same time, she doesn't condone rape and violence or children.
Yeah, well, the thought it should be that way is purely a concept. It's just an idea appearing.
Exactly.
How do you know it shouldn't be that way? It is that way.
But the paradoxical point is where she says, I don't condone that. Yeah. And at the same time, I don't tell myself it shouldn't be that way.
Because both are a concept. Even loving what is a concept.
So you're saying they're both concepts.
It's all a concept.
I don't condone it as a concept too.
That's right. You don't have to. You're not condoning it or rejecting it. Neither
Well, it's all
accepting nor
yourself, it shouldn't be
rejecting.
that way, exactly.
And you're not saying, not necessarily going into this thing of loving what is. It's another concept.
Yeah, she says it's another concept, but it's a nice concept. Like the concept.
Well, I mean, it does speak to this idea that, in a certain sort of a way, we were talking about it, that, there are kind of, I don't know how to say this, but, there's kind of, I hesitate to say this. I'll say it, but it's a concept. They're relatively worse and better concepts.
Yeah, that's what she
in
said.
the scheme of things. That's why if you do look at somebody, you look at these teachings like, they may talk to you at kind of different levels. So Krishna, says, go fight. Well, that's at a certain level, whatever. But ultimately he tells Arjuna that he's the supreme reality. So it just depends. A concept may be useful or utilitarian and have some kind of practical value at a certain stage.
What about the concept that the world is an illusion? Is that a better one or a worse one?
It's another concept.
Does it resonate with you?
No. But it depends on where you're standing. In other words, it depends on where you're standing in relation to that concept. If you're saying this world is a fixed reality, it's the only truth, there's nothing beyond this world, this is me, this is it, then this notion that the world is an illusion could be kind of useful to start to challenge that a little bit. On the way to eventually realizing who you are, Because the person that says the world is a fixed reality, that's true, they're thinking their ultimate identity is in that. And that my being resides in that, and that's all there is. And then they have so there is some concept like Maya or illusion, or that the world's a dream, or it's all a picture in consciousness or something. But that's the perfect example of what I'm saying. That the concept the world is a fixed reality is a concept. The concept that the world is an illusion appearing in consciousness and no substance or something is also a concept.
And you don't really need any of them.
Ultimately, you're going to drop all of them. But I would say, and I guess I'm going to, risk it, the second one is better. But it's not really ultimately better because they're all concepts. But if I'm interested in seeing my true essence, then walking around with this notion that the world is a fixed reality, I'm in that, is not so practical. But because if I start to question the kind of the solidity of the world and then start to wonder about my identity and start to get curious about that, I feel that concept would actually be a little bit more helpful for me. So that's why guys like Ramana and other people would teach. They would definitely teach at some stage in a certain context that exact teaching that the world is an illusion. But if you actually follow them through and then see where they kind of go with it, they discard that too. His final teaching was there's no world, there's no illusion, there's no separation, nothing's ever happened. There's never been anything at all except consciousness. But, so it's like a continuum of concepts, and even that's a concept. But, the world is a fixed reality, there's nothing else. The world is a dream, illusion that comes and goes. Then once you see the world is like that, then he doesn't stop there. He says, this world is just a manifestation in consciousness. And then at that point you just forget it. You're not even interested in the discussion of the nature of the world because it's like turning you toward this, consciousness. So that's why, so even the statement the world is just an appearance in consciousness is a concept. Even the statement that
I blank out whenever I read those things a million times, and I just kind of blank out as soon as when I cross them. They just...
Sounds good.
Yeah. No, it's not. I feel unworthy.
As he would say, and who's aware of the blank? So and even the pointer, all there is consciousness, or there's all oneness. That's a concept. All being is the reality. That's a concept. Consciousness is the absolute. That's a concept. You are consciousness. That's a concept. Even those are, Satchidananda is the ultimate reality. That's a total concept. But again, it became clear to me after really, a while and really kind of getting some things pointed out. But even the biggest mega concept like being, or consciousness, or Satchidananda, whatever, a Maharaj said one time. He said that somebody asked him, "Well, what is Satchidananda?" He said, "It's the highest, most refined concept that the mind can grasp. But what I'm talking about is beyond that."
So any question that arises from anyone, it has to be based in some sort of conceptual identity. And so if any kind of question arises, it's just an indication that seeing is not clear. I mean,
let's say, without making, but just the factual statement is every question is based on a concept.
It's from that perspective, right? I mean, from that identification.
Ultimately, that's true. Every question is based on the idea that you somehow separated and you're incomplete.
So maybe you have a question, you know that you're identified with the conceptual.
Who is identified? So, you don't use it.
Right.
See, it's a very powerful, clear insight,
Right.
it'll be very liberating, very helpful. But just at the tail end, you put yourself back in as a negative person with a problem.
Right.
Oh, that means that I'm not there.
Right.
That's a concept. Let that one go. Now, without that concept, what are you? Where are you?
Can't say anything about it.
But whatever you can't say anything about, that's what it is.
What about the concept of suicide? So once you are totally freedom and harmony with yourself and the world, not having the concept of suicide, just doing it. Would that be
Well,
a normal way?
Gee, you're a cheery fellow. Well, it all depends on what you define as a self. See, people kill the body because they think the body's them. Now, can you actually kill the true self? What do you mean by the self? Well, you say suicide means kill the self. So somebody kills the self because there's too much misery and pain and suffering and they want to end it. So why are they doing suicide? Because they want to be free of suffering.
If there's no one, who does the killing?
Huh? It happens.
It happens.
I do happen to in my studies in years past, even though it didn't help me with the essence of this, but I do remember things that might be interesting, and that one of Buddha's disciples committed suicide. One of his aware or awake disciples committed suicide, and they went to Buddha and said, "Isn't this ignorance? Doesn't this guy make a mistake? Isn't he going to have all this bad karma?" And the teaching, as I recall, was no. Socrates, committed suicide. But he said the guy's not doing it because he thinks he's a no good separate self. I think he was ill with terminal cancer or something, and he just for whatever. I said, "Oh, that's just he already saw who he was. It wasn't a statement on any of this stuff at all. It was just a practical decision." So Buddha sanctioned it, said it was okay. I mean, somebody once left there. It was kind of a funny thing too. I'm not saying we should do this or condoning it, but he had that thing with the Society of Monks and all that, so they were doing it that way and go off and practice with all that. So one guy left his family, the baby's sitting there crying, and the guy just walked away, joined the monks. And the wife is saying, "Well, he should work, feed his family. This is unacceptable. He's letting his baby starve." Buddha said, "It's okay." So that's those things that maybe you don't want to hear. Oh, what? Buddha said, walk away from your child, let it starve, you're not going to provide for your family? I'm not saying either way, just a factoid from the past that I remember. But this idea that somehow this fixed thing, like, you'd never commit suicide, you'd never do this, you'd never do that, it's all totally erroneous. And who's deciding that, and what's the reference point? I mean, the main thing in all that stuff is not even the act, it's where do you stand and who are you? If you know who you are, and it's like you're not suffering under some erroneous concept of your being and all that, and then whatever happens is just happening. And it could be then that suicide would be the most intelligent act. It could conceivably be. I'm not saying I know when or how that would work, but just theoretically it might be a very compassionate, intelligent decision. That's what Buddha said. He said, for that particular person, with this incurable physical thing. It was just intelligence. Socrates drank the hemlock. You know.
Well, he was forced, actually. I mean, he was forced.
No, well, not actually. He drank it himself. I mean, he
Well,
would.
he drank himself, but I mean, he had it all day.
I mean, he picked it up with a smile on his face and drank it. Said, "Cheers."
He could have left. He could have gone to exile.
He could have left any time that he wanted to. Really, I'm not. I mean, this is all just. It's just all.
We had the example of the Buddhist monks during the Vietnam War who poured gasoline on themselves. I mean, you wouldn't call that suicide, or I wouldn't. They were protesting.
Well, just think, some people go. If you let's say killing, for example. Everybody would think killing is right out of the gate is wrong. But then again, your country's getting attacked. You're doing. You could selflessly go defend your country out of a sense of selflessness, and in that activity, you are engaged in killing. Just like Krishna told Arjuna to go kill his family. He's saying that, in the right context, in the right perspective, he's saying that does not incur any kind of karma and any problem. And he was actually saying to resist that is actually more of a concept. If you don't do that, that's more of a self-centered position. So it depends. So is killing or suicide or all these things, is it right or wrong? You don't know. There's no answer that just says black and white it is. It depends. So this is interesting, actually. Same thing with morality, all these things. The same activity could be totally selfless or totally selfish. Killing, suicide, anything like that. So what's really going on? It's where do you stand and what's your identity? Is it coming from that self-center and that notion of the illusionary self, and then I'm acting out of that position? Or maybe that's not the position. That's not what's driving that. And there's just selfless activity that's just going on naturally, and it's not in reference to defective self. Because these people go to Iraq and they kill all these people, and they come back and they get decorated as heroes. Yeah. And a lot of people think that's totally fine because look, they risk their life for the country and all that, and they get praised and everything like that. And maybe that's just fine, because we revere Washington and all these people and heroes and generals and stuff. Well, what did they really do? They slaughtered a bunch of people. But see, they weren't acting selfishly often. We know intuitively we revere and admire the selfless nature, and we respect the selflessness of it. We feel the absence of the self-center in a heroic act, and then we kind of respect. And it's funny because what are we actually doing there? We're acknowledging the value of selflessness. We know that person wasn't selfish. They didn't do it for selfish gain. They did something beyond the ego. And even common people recognize that, and we say that is something. And these people we put up on all these statues and all that. So I think what's happening is we recognize the selflessness. So what does that mean? It means the selfless. It's just a confirmation of the fact that people intuitively realize that the selfless position is ignorance. It's not in harmony with the absolute value. That to any extent that diminishes, that is moving us in the direction of what's ultimately of highest value. And then, of course, let's just take it logically to the end point. The diminishment or the relinquishment of the ego concept, therefore, must be the supreme value. And that's what all the religions are saying. Buddha, Jesus, everybody. So this erroneous concept of a separate self that I've taken and lived from that perspective, the examination of that or the surrender of that or seeing through that to be what I truly am in all these types of teachings is the main purpose. Because in that, there's the resolution of the root of suffering, the root of separation. But we see all these examples all over the place. We just don't maybe extract the kernel out of it. Why do we worship a hero? Why do we intuitive? A guy preserves his family and kind of risks his life, but in doing that he kills a bunch of people, and we say that man was a hero. But, if we were going strictly on the physical act, we would say that he's a murderer. So even to call somebody a murderer only depends on how they were doing it, where they were acting from. If it was selfless, then they're a hero. If it was selfish, then they're a murderer, and we go and turn around and execute them or something like that. So, well, then what happens? The people that execute them, aren't they a murderer then? Well, they're just doing their duty to the country, and they get a medal or something. It's kind of funny when you start. But the only thing that really saves us in this whole thing is to try to see the underlying, mechanism of what's really driving it all. So can we sit here and say, well, I was smoking the other day, is that wrong? Or whatever? I don't know. I just killed somebody. I want to commit suicide. Is that right or wrong?
So I have another cheery question.
Jeez.
So for me, it comes up like, why bother? Why strive for something? Why trying to be better at something? Why getting up in the morning and doing something?
Well, stay in bed all day.
Huh?
Stay in bed all day if you can.
I haven't tried that one yet.
There was a Sailor Bob story that he used to tell that comes to mind anyway. So this guy was in the payphone and was calling Sailor Bob to do a consultation from the payphone. And it was the same question, gee Bob, if there's no doer, I guess I'm just going to sit here in the phone booth and not move. Bob just said, okay, try it. See, he said, we'll see if you're still there in the morning. And of course, the guy wasn't there. It's all just a bunch of conceptualizing. You're not doing anything anyway. There's nobody there. There's no ego. That's the thing. But the doing is happening anyway. It's not like even the notion, why should I get up, is already an imaginary concept of the erroneous self that you're thinking is there. There's no. Getting up happens like it always has. Just like you're breathing, or you're looking at me, or you're sitting there, or whatever. So it's not that any of those activities are just kind of maybe, maybe not. But the only mistake conceptually is referring it to that imaginary self-center, and then saying, I guess which is only a concept, and then saying, well, I. Now all the emphasis is on the reality of the I as the thing doing everything. Well, maybe I'll get up, maybe I won't. Well, if that I is really valid. But without that I, the getting up will happen or not happen. Or it won't, or it will, or it won't. And
or if you follow that, it sets you very free. Because if you're there to stay in bed, I think you will be very free.
Same issue, though, if there's anybody to stay in bed. So... so the striving and the doing and the responsibility, and I did this and I did that and what's right, it's all imaginary. Really, it's all coming out of a conceptual evaluation. You see, a child, when it wakes up in the morning, is it thinking, this is what I'm going to do today, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. It's just off, running around, having fun. Very spontaneous. Just like nature, the trees out there aren't saying, I think, I'm going to grow a leaf today. Since there's no doer here, I guess I won't grow any leaves today because there's no reason to.
But there's a difference between the tree and me.
That's the problem.
Because I have a choice. The tree doesn't really have a choice. Like it just has to be there. Right? Whatever it is, it grows and that's it.
Same with you.
But, no, but like I could now sit there or I could leave.
That's what you think. That's the illusion. We talked about that yesterday. The choice is a function of the human brain. Why keep putting the I thought back into it? Buddha says there's doing but no doer. There's thinking but no one thinking. There's choices, but there's no one choosing. So either Buddha's right or you're wrong.
That's a concept.
Or you're right and he's wrong. I'm leaning his way.
Maybe wrong is better than right.
But so the question is really, is there an I in there doing those choices? That's the $1 million question. I mean, we could say, there's a thought in there. A choice certainly happens. But how you evaluate that and how you ascribe it to the owner of that, to me, that's the question. Is it a choice arising in consciousness, or is it being willed and done by this person in there? and that person is the whole, kind of driving thing, and then all these other things. See, like in the perspective you're saying, it's kind of like it's all around the reality of the person, and then I've got this body, mind, and I'm going to either do it or not do it, and the whole thing is like that is the way that it works. The question would be, though, is that really how it works? If you actually look at it, I feel that, if you look, a little bit of looking shows the complete, untenability of this notion of the separate I running the show. If the separate I was running the show, you'd never get sick, you'd never be unhappy, you'd never think anything you didn't want to think, you'd never age, you'd never die, you just will everything to be exactly the way you want it to be. You'd never, but it doesn't really happen that way. And even the choices, that we think that we make, so many of the choices, if you actually look, they just pretty much grab a hold and run, and then you tag along later saying, I did that. That's like being dragged along by a team of horses, through the dust and saying, look, I'm doing it, everybody. I don't really think you're doing it at that stage. The last gasp of the ego thought.
So there's a part where I don't get that completely, so I'm gonna stay with this, because I want to learn this. So how did you get here at Tamer Door? How did Tanya drag you there, and it didn't happen that you did it, or who did that?
Why do you think anybody did it?
I don't know. How did you get
Okay,
there?
so let me give you the lesson in non-ego. It's the one taught to me by Sailor Bob, and he's repeated it many times. It's very, very helpful. Okay, right now seeing is happening. Just happening for everybody. Now, we may think later as a thought, I am seeing. Right? But that thought is not seeing anything. And that thought wasn't even in the seeing until you thought about it. So the thought is basically a concept. Now, we start to think, by just not looking at it very carefully, that this notion of an I, which is a concept, is the thing seeing. And that's what I am. And that I is the main character, and all this other stuff is being done by him. But our direct experience, when we look at it, we see that the I thought, even to talk about who, is only being added in as a concept on top of this spontaneous experience. So the body's just sitting here. Now, if I say I'm sitting here as a concept, that is something the mind is adding on to that. Well, and then we start getting all wrapped up into, what is this I doing, and how does it fit in, and the I needs to be there. The I does not need to be here. You do not need an I concept to be seeing me perfectly well right now. So let's just, we can, maybe if we look in this way, to see that the I is a complete concept. It doesn't see, it doesn't think, it doesn't do, it's a labeling construct that comes in after the event and puts this kind of ownership onto it, which is fine. Just like we said yesterday, you're not your name, but it comes on after as a useful thing to kind of use, but nobody's going to confuse their being with their name. But what if this I thought was the same thing? Doing is happening, choices are happening, seeing's happening, it's all functioning effortlessly and very intelligently, because, life is intelligent and consciousness is aware and intelligent. And then the mind comes along a step later and puts the I concept onto everything, and then starts getting into this whole game of, look at me, I'm seeing, I'm doing, I'm choosing, I'm thinking, and it's all based on me. Which is exactly what's happening, and that's fine, because that's like a name, it's pragmatically useful. But then a little trick happens in there, is that we suddenly start to think that I am the I. That's what I actually am. And it's like we take our identity, or we take our natural way of just being, and shift it onto this concept. And then we start going around saying, I'm thinking, I'm doing, I'm deciding, I'm choosing. It's look at me, everybody. But that thing is a completely dead image with no real, again, that I thought, is it seeing? No. Is it thinking? No. Is it doing? Does it have any power? Does it have any life or consciousness or intelligence as a concept? Nothing. So that's why that might be an explanation, let's say, why to believe that I am the I thought, why is it suffering? Because it's a complete distortion of what you are. This alive, aware, undefined, natural state of what you truly are, which is not limited, to be imagining that that is this dead, lifeless image in the mind and be trying to live your life saying that's what I am, I think that that would generate some kind of conflict, some distortion. That's why even grasping it for a second creates a bind. The second you say, even if you say, like, I want to get enlightened, you're screwed already. Because the seeing, the awareness is the enlightenment. But the I, suddenly we're thinking, that I image is the thing, it needs to get something. Or whatever. So even the highest thing, like I am Brahman is not true. Because, Brahman or the Absolute is supposed to be the pure awareness. Well, the awareness doesn't have to think I am the awareness, but so the ego idea is trying to emulate the Absolute by kind of saying, well, I'm not just a separate doer, chooser, I am the Absolute. But so we sit there then thinking, maybe we're repeating that, I'm the Absolute, I am the awareness, I'm free, I am that kind of thing. But it has a scent, a kind of a fragrance of the illusion of the limitation into it. Who's saying that, and why are they saying that? And it doesn't feel like, it doesn't have that perfume or that simplicity of natural feeling, So even to say I am the Absolute requires the investment in the I thought. Okay, so that's why they say we're not supposed to sit here like I am that or I am the Absolute, then start thinking and pondering on it and wondering it and ruminating on it and all that stuff. We're supposed to see what they mean by that. What does it mean? And the pointer at that point is history. Saying whatever I am is that. Can I drop it immediately? I'm done with that. But now let me look and see what I am. And that's very refreshing because at that moment then you're not looking through the concept. You're looking at the presence of what's alive and aware and spacious and natural and simple, and it just immediately rings truer with a lot more kind of I don't know how to describe it, but just intuitively or experientially, instead of it feeling contracted and kind of conceptual, it feels kind of more simple and more open. So,
John, I've read several different spiritual people will say nothing ever happens, nothing's going to happen, and I have my own idea what it means. But do you have a sense of that?
Well, it's one of those concepts to be. We know already after today that it's definitely one of those concepts to be discarded at the.
That nothing ever happens.
So somebody said to somebody at some stage, they uttered that concept.
But I thought that was one of those high concepts.
Well, but all
I
concepts.
want to understand it before I discard it.
Yeah. Well, all the concepts are still concepts, But so this is more in alignment of this kind of the world as a dream type of concept. Like you had a dream last night, or you had 1,000 dreams in your life. Where are they all? What actually happened?
Where they came.
Did anything ever actually ultimately happen, or was it just an appearance in the mind?
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, when it all is folded up and it's all gone, it's like nothing ever happened. Someone said at lunch yesterday, I don't know if they're here, they said something like, I've had this whole lifetime of ups and downs and experiences and all that. You say that? Somebody said that, and it's almost like it never happened. How did you say that?
I said that I can, in this moment, look back over my life at the joys, the angers, the sorrows, the dramas, the deaths, the everything, and in this moment, there's nothing. There's nothing. It's not here. It's gone. It's nothing.
So it's it's as if, in present experience, it's not even present. It doesn't exist. It literally, there's nothing even to refer to except conjuring up a memory about it.
Yeah.
So if we just stick very closely with immediacy of what's here, we can't even speak of it as being present or anything without actually conceptualizing it. But all this is really doing though is is these are just pointers to again, but there is something here though. See, that's the important part. It's this way of kind of snapping us off of this kind of, looking at everything objective and thinking that's the only thing in town, and to see, it's like he was saying in that song, he says, forget the past, How many people spend their whole life dwelling, in the past and the concepts and all that? So just saying, look, that's just a dream. It's almost like it never happened. Let's just let it go. Let it be, The future has never happened. Why get all worked up into that? It's all conceptual. So that leaves you just right here in this immediacy of what's here. So already that's such an incredibly freeing position, just that. Because if you look at what's here right now, like, well, what's going on? Just a few little things happening and nothing. But then he throws in the kicker, let go of the present. I mean, that's all. To me, that's all you'd ever need to understand. Like, if you let go of the concept of the present, what remains? And that's, I think, there's something present that doesn't depend on whether you're thinking of the past, present, future, anything like that. There's just something immediacy, something immediately present, non-conceptual. That's what I was talking to as being, effortless awareness, or whatever. And I think that's what we're kind of trying to see that, or whatever, recognize that. And so he says those three things, which are just incredibly profound. But then he goes on and he hammers it home with these other three statements. Don't meditate. Don't analyze it. Don't figure it out. He just says, just be. Just rest. Just be what you are. Classic Ramana type statements coming out of Buddhist tradition, So without the past, present, future, without the effort, without the analyzing, without the doing, without the concept, to just full stop, what's that? Like that. Because it's not like they talk about that as emptiness or formless or space-like, but even without the conceptualizing, something is present that is not negated or even touched by that.
Even the conceptualizing is appearing in this presence.
Yeah.
So there can be concepts or no concepts.
That's true. But without a taste or a sense of that conceptless presence, that, for people hearing what you said, is a total concept. They have no idea what you're saying.
Could be, or they may hear it.
They might.
From who they are, and then maybe
exactly. But then if they
recognition.
That's right. So the only key operating thing is not what you say or I say it or whatever. It's seeing the point of it. Understanding the point. So from the position of this awareness, non-conceptual presence, that actually gets to the little wrap-up whole thing. All this appearance is just an appearance in and of that.
Yes.
It is that. So the waves on the sea are just the sea. All this thought and conceptualizing that we're so delicately looking at the end of the day, in substance, once we have a sense of what the substance is, what the presence is, the last little thing you can see is that every thought, every perception, every object, every appearance is contained in that and is made of that and is that. And there is no separation. So all the concepts are that. And then that's, that just brings it all home, because then you realize whatever you think, say, do, wherever you are, body, mind, whatever the activity is, nothing but a display or an appearance of that. And at that level, even to speak of the appearances and the awareness, it is a conceptual distinction. Because if all of these things are of that, made of that, come from that, return to that, and have no existence apart from that, then they are that.
Yes.
So that's what you hear, that not only you are that, but this is that, and all is that, and that's it.
That's it.
Yeah. And it all comes home, and there's even no distinction between awareness and the appearance.
It's only a paradox in the mind.
Yeah, exactly.
But the truth, it's all true.
Yeah.
Everything is the spaciousness, the peace, and it's all arising in this consciousness that's here in this moment.
And then even, the notion that, again, we just take this home to its nth degree, the notion that there is something arising in awareness is another concept. That concept that there is something there arising is a concept.
No problem with concepts.
Yeah, and
seeing through the concept.
Yeah, and there's no problem. Yeah, and when we say, that's why I've never said here go into samadhi and lose your concepts or suppress them. We're more like understanding them. so that we can see. We don't see. It's a simple thing, really. A concept is not the thing. A concept is just a construct, and it doesn't have any inherent ultimate reality. It's just a tool. And it's a game. And now play the game. Now you play the game, and have fun playing the game using concept. But the only really difference is, seeing a concept as a concept. And but does that mean that you've achieved anything, or you're different from somebody, or because it doesn't mean anything? It's just. But so the Dzogchen thing, that's nice if I can remember it, but something to the. And this is what you're speaking from this position. So it's something like all there is this ever fresh. Ever-present, non-conceptual awareness, and nothing else. There has never been anything else other than this. That's it. So I'm glad you brought perfect, pretty much at the end here, but perfect resolution, because it's nice to just tie the little bow around the whole thing. Because the thing is, you kind of point out, let's say you have the ocean and the waves, and somebody sees all the waves. They say, I don't see any ocean there. I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean it's all one? All I see is these little things that are coming and going. Everybody's talking about the ocean. I don't get it. So, you can have this discussion. Well, the waves come and go, and they're on something, and there's something below that, and it's ever present. And like, I don't know, I see it, And the wave comes and goes. All I can see is the wave coming and going. And then you say, well, that wave disappeared. Was there something still there? Well, I don't know. Yeah, I guess there was. And so they kind of get introduced to that and everything. And then pretty soon they're saying, I kind of know what the ocean is. Now I know what they're talking about. And then their last little dying gasp is, but what about the waves? What were those waves? What were they? Oh, well, the waves are just the emanation of the ocean itself, and all there is here is the ocean. Oh, now, and then he can see what you were kind of trying to say in the beginning was what was just there in the beginning was the one substance, and all this is just a display of the one substance, and that's all there is. And then, but that little question is important too. And I actually had that question myself at one stage. Yeah, but it's great that we're this and this non-conceptual and all that, but what about this appearance? Well, I guess we could maybe end on a song. 2 or 1, we'll see how we do. Okay, so I guess I'll do this one. Shankara was a Hindu Advaitin sage, one of their great teachers, and so he's got a little poem here that's, I guess he was describing his experience of this. No caste have I, no laws, no sect or race, no name or form, no virtue or vice. Transcending time, space, and all cause, one without a second, ever peaceful am I. Beyond words or speech, ultimate reality am I, directly perceived by knowledge alone. Pure consciousness am I, without beginning or end, the one without a second, ever peaceful am I. The lotus moon shining in true seers' hearts, imperceptible to senses, divested of form, unreachable either by intellect or thought, the one without a second, ever peaceful and mild. By the presence or absence of the world, forever free, one that nothing can divide, the one without a second, ever peaceful and mild, the one without a second, ever peaceful am I. Let's see, how about one more for the road here? One of my favorite stories was the Sixth Patriarch of Zen. You may have heard of this. I call him the Nisargadatta of China. So he was a peasant boy, uneducated, and he got some pointing out to this true nature, which in Zen they call the mind, the one mind, the true nature. So what's kind of interesting about this is that he was not a monk and he wasn't a part of the community, and the Fifth Patriarch was looking for somebody that might understand this to kind of carry on the teaching, and these kind of monks were coming forth and they were saying different things, and the head monk says, he wrote a poem, right? He says, the mind is like the body is like a stand, and the mind is like a mirror, and the defilements are like dust coating the mind, and the way to get to Buddhahood is by wiping it constantly clean, and by doing that you will attain the freedom. So the patriarch, the Fifth Patriarch, said, well, that's good, relatively helpful at some stage, but no cigar. It's a dharmic term.
Instead of no beady?
Close but no beady. Close but no cigar. So then this kid who stumbled into the monastery and was not a monk and all that, but anyway, he had been very interested in this stuff, and he said, I have a poem, and he says, the mind is not a stand, the body is not a stand, the mind is not a bright mirror. From the beginning of time, nothing has ever existed. Right? Therefore, where can this defiling dust even alight? So that was his view of Buddhism. So the master said, that's it. You get the cigar. So anyway, so he went on to be the founder of Zen and all this stuff, Chan as they called it in China. So there's a story that's kind of fun. There's a book called the Platform Sutra. and it's his story. But this is a little synopsis of his story and what he saw. And he kind of, in the chorus of the song, he kind of expounds on what the nature of the, as he calls it, the mind, what its nature really is. So anyway, it's a nice little story. So here we go. Well, I grew up a peasant boy, but my mind was bright and clear. One day in the marketplace I happened to hear a man recite a sutra. It was Buddha's word. It set my heart on fire the moment that I heard. He told me his master was living in the north, teaching in a monastery with 1,000 monks. I made up my mind I would journey to his feet and ask him to lead me to the one reality. For 30 days I walked, hardly taking food or rest. All that kept me going was my passion for the quest. When I arrived there, he asked me why I came. To become a living Buddha was the answer that I gave. He knew my heart was true, so he called me late one night and read the Diamond Sutra to me in the candlelight. When I heard about a mind that alights upon no thing, suddenly I came to a great awakening. Who would have known that my mind is intrinsically pure? Who would have known that my mind is forever free from change? Who would have known it gives rise to this manifested world? Who would have known I would find Buddha is the light in my own mind? Well, ever since that night I've had just one thing to teach. The wisdom of all sages is in everybody's reach. The life of illusion ends as soon as you begin to let go of everything and turn your light within. Who would have known that my mind is intrinsically pure? Who would have known that my mind is forever free from change? Who would have known it gives rise to this manifested world? Who would have known I would find Buddha is the light in my own mind? Buddha is the light in my own mind. Buddha is the light in my own mind. All I just like to say on that, which one of my favorite points here is he says he heard this pointer that says when the mind alights upon no thing. That was his big insight there, and that no thing is like any concept or any idea, any definition. So without grasping or defining ourselves in terms of any concept whatsoever, good, bad, high, low, anything like that, what is it? What is there? And whatever is present, that's what he said. Who would have known that? And he comes out with all these insights into that non-concept, intrinsically pure, free from change, the source of the world, the very presence of the Buddha, or that light of reality, is that which he called, his own mind. So, pretty interesting story there. All right, well, what next?